Dollars and Cents is made on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Elinor Johnston-Leek, the Senior Content Producer here at the Australia Institute, and as always, I'm talking to our Chief Economist, Greg Jericho. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Elinor.
How are we doing this week?
Good. Been doing a bit of travel this week.
Yeah.
I had to fly over to Adelaide and back, but I'm back here and roaring to go.
What were you doing in Adelaide?
I was speaking at the United Workers Union annual conference.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Just before we get into it, the latest Vantage Point essay is available for pre-order now. In More For Me, How the Gas Industry Tricked Australia, Richard Dennis examines how big gas pulled off perhaps the greatest con in Australia's history. You can pre-order it now for just $19.95 or subscribe to the Vantage Point series for just $64.95 to get 4 engaging essays a year. For a limited time only, use the code FOOLME, that's FOOLME, to receive a free copy of Richard's book, Econobabble, along with your Vantage Point subscription. Get yours now via the link in the show notes. So, Greg, we're talking about one of your absolute favourite things in the whole wide world this week, inflation. At a recent speech at a charity fundraiser this week, RBA Governor Michelle Bullock said that, she had some warnings about potential rate rises being on the table if inflation didn't stay down.
The board is prepared to act as required to achieve its mandate, including by increasing the cash rate further if needed.
There seemed to be some, ominous headlines. People were predicting we might be in for another rate rise this year. But we've got some new CPI figures out this week on Wednesday, and that kind of let the air out of the tyres in that regard.
This means inflation has come in lower than expected, lower than forecast in the budget or by the Reserve Bank, but it's still higher than we would like it to be.
Greg, what are the numbers at?
Yeah, it's the June quarter figures came out and the June monthly figures at the same time. And they showed that inflation in the past year was 3.8%, which was down from 4.1%.
Yep.
So a good drop. The underlying inflation that everyone seems to think is vital and important. Remember, the trim mean is they get rid of the 15% biggest increases and the 15% biggest drops or smallest increases. That stayed steady at 3.6%. But really the big story about them all was the fact that as soon as they came out, because they were lower, the figures were lower than expected, the odds of an interest rate rise just absolutely plummeted.
Yeah.
And the story with that is this time last week, the odds of an interest rate rise were about 20%.
Yeah.
And then the June unemployment figures came out, which came out after we'd done our podcast, and they showed unemployment was steady at 4.4%. I saw the figures and thought, that ain't going to affect anything. There's no real big thing. Underemployment rose, and so I thought, that actually definitely means they're not going to affect anything. But because the actual employment numbers were kind of okay, suddenly everyone's like, rate rise is coming.
Yeah.
And within a couple of days, suddenly the odds of a rate rise were up around 47%. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? Unemployment didn't shift. Underemployment went up. These aren't great figures. And yet everyone, I think, is in that mode of knowing that the Reserve Bank is just aching to raise interest rates. And so they're kind of betting any good news, the Reserve Bank's going to take it as a sign, things are too hot. Everything calmed down a bit, and by sort of before the CPI figures came out on Wednesday, the odds were back to about 20%, and then they came out, they were lower than expected, and the odds suddenly crashed to about 3%.
Yeah.
There's really, I think, no chance of a rate rise next week or next fortnight, 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, well, that sounds good. I don't think we need another.
No, I mean, I think what they really showed was, look, the economy is not running hot like the Reserve Bank kind of seems to think it is. And if they are, like if you look at the unemployment figures of 4.4%, which historically, like over the last 40 years, is pretty low, but if you look over the last 5 years, it's actually a bit high. clearly there's not a lot of pressures in the economy. Yes, inflation's higher than 3% and everything, but it's not galloping away. It's coming down, just perhaps coming down a bit slower than the Reserve Bank might like.
Yeah. And do you know, do we have the details about if anything was driving that little drop?
Yeah, the big reason for the drop was petrol prices. And this all came off of the fall in oil prices from April and May. In June, there was about, I think it was 11%, pretty much if we round it, 11% fall in petrol prices. Now, the problem with that is that in July, oil prices rose because, oddly, Donald Trump had not solved the Middle East. Bizarrely, completely unexpected that occurred. So oil prices rose, but factored into that as well was the government reducing the fuel excise, dropping it from 50% to just cutting it by 25%. So that added kind of a 16 cents extra. But so next month when the figures come out, petrol prices will probably rise about 5-6%. So that might sort of moderate things, but there are other things also happening, like the big increase in prices in June was international travel.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, well, that's because June's a really good time to leave Australia and go to the Northern Hemisphere. And the same with domestic travel. Domestic travel was expensive, and that's because, again, June's a good time for people, especially living in Canberra, to go to Queensland or somewhere else. And so it's just an annual thing where this is always a time when prices for holidays peak or at least jump up a bit. So that'll wash out a bit in July. The annual rate of 3.8%, the big driver of that was electricity prices.
Okay.
And those electricity prices accounted for about 0.5 percentage points of that 3.8. And that was purely due not because electricity prices have risen, but because in June last year there were still electricity subsidies and things like that. So, and now they're not there, so that makes it look like prices are going up. So that'll flush out. That pretty much stops from July. So it'll be interesting in that there'll be a few moving parts still going on to know where,
either way.
Yeah. And so it's a bit tough to discern just what's going to happen sort of in the next couple months because, you got oil prices, petrol prices going back up, but you got the counteract of electricity prices no longer having an impact. You got the weird seasonal impact of holiday travel. I do wonder, especially in June figures, whether the international holiday travel might have been affected by travel to the World Cup, which might have been a bit more expensive than normal. There's a lot of things always going on, but the upshot for everyone is that no one now expects a rate rise in August.
Okay, that's good.
So a defining feature and recurring feature of the global economy in recent years has been the increasing frequency and the impact of supply shocks. The world has been more shock prone in recent years, but the economy is more resilient than it was in the past. The adoption of credible inflation targets by central banks to keep inflation low and stable has played a role in that improved resilience.
And at the same speech where she was giving warnings about the potential for rate rises, the RBA governor, Michelle Bullock, was also saying some sort of interesting things on a more global level. She said that the world has become more shock prone, but also that Australia is more resilient than it has been in the past. And I guess, at first you sort of think a lot of people might agree with her about the world being more shock prone, the new normal being chaos, it seems, and how many once in a lifetime global crises can we possibly live through? But is she right about this, or are we just, thinking that we're special?
No, I think she's right, and it's as you say, how often have we been saying, God, it's a once in a 100-year event, or it's a once in a lifetime, or you're reading commentary, the old Chinese proverb, may your enemies live in interesting times. And it's like, God, I can't remember the time it was normal. What is normal now?
Yeah.
And you could kind of argue that since the global financial crisis back in 2008, things haven't really been quote unquote normal. And certainly not since the pandemic have things been normal, and that's getting on 6 years, which is starting to be a bit of a trend. And she might as well also say, the world has been Trumpified.
Yeah. That certainly adds a lot of chaos and uncertainty.
When you've got America being a chaos agent, that upends a lot. But it's also what was interesting about her speech was the implications for interest rates and monetary policy, because normally when there is a supply shock, like
the war in Iran.
Yeah, like the war in Iran.
Yeah.
Which raises prices, raises oil prices, it sets off price rises in petrol and other things. As a general rule, reserve banks should ignore it. And because, as we've said many times, Reserve Bank raising interest rates doesn't affect oil prices. So what are you trying to slow down here?
Yeah.
Inflation has not occurred because of anything we've done. It's not demand driven, it's supply shocks. What she is, I sort of read from the tea leaves of her speech, was this essential trying to say, we've got so many supply shocks now, and supply shocks are so
frequent.
Frequent and integral to what's happening with inflation that we need to respond to them, because otherwise people might start assuming that inflation is always going to be higher. And as a result, wage growth will take off, and then we'll have a wage price spiral. It was, again, just a return to this thing that the Reserve Bank, and I think Michelle Bullock in particular, has been completely devoted to this belief that a wage price spiral is just around the corner.
Yeah.
And a wage price spiral that will be set off by a supply shock. And I think this is purely because, Michelle Bullock came into the Reserve Bank in the early 80s. And that came after the supply shock of the late 70s, early 80s, due to the Iran oil crisis back then. But the world has changed a bit.
And in what way has it changed, do you think that?
Well, and it's something she even pointed out in her speech, our dependency on oil is much less than it used to be. I mean, you think about the fuel efficiency of cars now compared to then.
Yeah.
And and not just cars, but all machinery, we're so much more efficient. And so that means that such supply shocks aren't having the impact that they did 40 years ago. And that's a good thing, because that lessens the the impact on inflation and unemployment and other things. So in some ways she's saying we're more shock prone, but those shocks don't have as big of an impact as in the past. 40 years ago, we were very much dependent on America.
So this is Australia in
Australia
in particular.
Like if, it was the old joke, if, America sneezed, the rest of the world, caught a cold, caught pneumonia. Now that's not so much the case. We're certainly in Australia, because China's our biggest trade partner. So if America has a shitty time of it, well, it's not really going to affect us too much. And the GFC was a prime example of that. We didn't go down in the way that they did, whereas maybe 40 years ago we would have.
Yeah.
So there are things that are occurring that means just because there are more supply shocks, it doesn't mean that there's dim times ahead. But I think she was really trying to put the case that central banks around the world are kind of having to ditch the view that, it's a supply shock, we can ignore it. She's sort of saying, no, we can't ignore it because there's so many of them.
Yeah, interesting. And she also said in her speech that, one of the reasons she gave for Australia being more resilient than it has been in the past is she credited the adoption of a credible inflation target by the RBA in the 1990s, which apparently has played a key role in Australia's resilience. Is that just her giving herself a bit of a pat on the back, or the RBA giving itself a pat on the back?
Yeah, a little bit. And this goes into the whole thing that she's trying to make is that, in her view, having that 2 to 3% target range has been good because even when we've got supply shocks, most people still think, inflation in the long run will get back to between 2 and 3%.
Yeah.
Whereas her argument, and there probably is some validity to this, is that before then, such as back in 79, 80 and all that, when there were supply shocks and inflation zoomed up to 10% or more, people are like, is this... there was no sense that, it'll go back down to 2 to 3% because there was no overarching aim to get inflation to 2 to 3%. Now, that's fine. We've certainly at the Australia Institute and the Centre for Future Work and others, we've pointed out that, one of the problems with the inflation target has probably worked to keep wages growth down because there's this underlying sense of, we can't let wages growth go too much or that'll affect the inflation target, and a whole lot of underplaying of the impact of corporate profits, as we saw in 2022 when corporate profits exploded. Wage growth was not going up, and yet it was treated as though they had to raise interest rates to hurt workers. But again, it all goes to her broader point of why she thinks the Reserve Bank needs to raise interest rates, even though, in her own words, raising the interest rates won't affect inflation over the next 6 months if it's due to a supply shock issue, is that she wants to keep anchored those expectations. So pretty much now the RBA is saying everything's about the expectations of inflation, which is kind of, I think, a bit of an out that gives them a reason to raise rates, even though there's no evidence that, for example, wage growth is taking off.
But there might be the expectation of it.
Well, that's the thing. The Reserve Bank's always worried that there's going to be this expectation that wages, it's what she was saying when they last raised rates, is saying, this isn't going to do anything for inflation. But essentially, it's going to temper the economy, slow the economy, so that when the Iran war is all sorted, people won't feel really good about their job security.
Can't have that. Yeah.
They'll be more worried about keeping their job than thinking, okay, it's time to really go in hard on the wage negotiations and get wages growing. So and that's all about expectations.
Yeah. Also in the news this week, the topic of global wealth, I guess, as a whole, the Earth's wealth. The McKinsey Global Institute has released its annual global balance sheet for 2026. Well, it's self-described. The global balance sheet takes stock of all assets, liabilities, and wealth, providing a lens into economic health. So that's all assets, liabilities, and wealth of the planet, I suppose. It estimated that total global wealth reached nearly 1.8 quadrillion US dollars in 2025. That's 2.6 quadrillion Australian dollars, not a number you get to say very often. That is up from 1.7 quadrillion US dollars in 2024. Greg, what does this actually tell us? These numbers they don't seem real. And it's not like we have any, other planets to compare ourselves to. What does this information actually tell us?
Yeah, what the important aspect of it is, and this is the worrying sign, is that, as you say, this is basically all the wealth in the world. So what is wealth? Wealth is assets minus liabilities. So it's your wealth is not how much you earn each year, it's what you own, what you've got in the bank.
Yeah, your house.
The value of your house, the value of your car, the value of any shares you own.
Pokemon cards.
Your superannuation.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah.
Now, what they've done is not count up every single person's wealth, but basically do a bit of a guesstimate.
Yeah.
although I'm sure they would say it's not guessing, it's very precise.
I'd be interested to know what the rounding error is.
The big problem, though, is that what we're seeing is the value of the wealth is growing faster than economic growth, that's faster than the economies of the world.
Okay.
And one of the problems with this is, one, is this sustainable? And this is the concern, is this a big wealth bubble? Because looking at what is driving a lot of this increase in wealth. Now, some of it's house prices, which around the world have seen a bit of a moderation, and perhaps that's coming to Australia right now due to the changes in the budget and various other things, interest rates being a bit higher. But also it's by a lot of, what you'd almost call paper wealth, sort of bonds, shares, these type of things, which are not real in a sense. Think about the story about Elon Musk becoming the world's first trillionaire.
Yeah.
That was because when the SpaceX went public, suddenly the share prices went up because he's the majority owner, his value of all his shares went up. Then they went down, so now he's no longer a trillionaire. But, the problem with all of that, though, is, and this goes back to a really excellent book, which some people might have known because it was pretty popular at the time, by French economist Thomas Piketty, called Capital, where he looked at inequality over the centuries. And one of the things he posited was that when the rate of return on capital, such as investments and things like that, is greater than economic growth, inequality rises.
Okay.
And this is the thing. So when we're talking about, there's 1.8 quadrillion US dollars, who owns all that?
Yeah.
And who was getting the increase in all of that quadrillion over the past year? And it's a case of, one, it doesn't seem to be anchored very well to actual, the economy, what's happening with jobs, what's happening with just investment and things like that. It all seems to be tethered to, again, these sort of, we've decided that data centers and AI is really valuable. And so the share prices of those companies is going, well, but okay, is there any actual profit or investment or sales or things underpinning that represents that value? And so those two things are we headed for a bit of a big collapse in wealth, because the value of that wealth is getting rather too unconnected with reality of the actual economy. And also it's a sign that there's a real concentration of wealth and a growing global inequality, because we know, even here in Australia, just among households, wealth inequality is much greater than income inequality.
Yeah.
And purely because, things like, as we're saying, what wealth is everything you own. The value of those assets is a heck of a lot more than the high income of some people. But people who are on, say, medium wages, often have are very asset poor because they don't own a home. They, maybe don't have a lot of stuff compared to all the stuff and all the value of properties that the richest own. So wealth inequality is always much bigger. And what this is kind of showing is that globally is also growing. And, in the past, that has often led to political instability, which you could say we're seeing very much, and often to a correction of things. And so
what does that mean, a correction of things?
Well, collapse in share prices, market crashes and things like that. Now, it's not saying that this is coming, but it is a case of when wealth is growing in a way that's unconnected with fundamentals in the economy. It's a bit like we saw with the dot-com bubble in 2000. We had all these, you've got a company that has got a web page. Great, we'll buy your shares. And it's like, you're actually not selling anything. There's only so long that can go on. And the concern is, if this is, happening now with much bigger numbers and across a much broader scope of things, maybe the crash will be more harsh. And again, we saw that with the GFC. This is what happens when values get
untethered
to reality. And that was the problem with the GFC. In America, mortgage-backed securities were completely untethered to the reality of people being able to pay off their homes and things like that. And at some point, reality finds a way, shall we say.
And do we think that the AI boom is a big driver of this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it certainly is a key aspect of concerns about a bubble, because we're seeing massive investment, and it's all based on this expectation that, this will deliver a profit one day.
But none of the companies are making a profit.
None of the companies are making profit. There's massive investment for things that perhaps don't even have the supply capacity of energy that will power these things, and yet the investment is occurring. And perhaps at some point we're going to be people going, we actually all this value of our companies that was done on the belief that all this investment in these data centers is going to occur, and we've found that actually it can't occur.
All this value is untethered to reality. Yeah.
And especially when you look at who is investing in those companies, and the fact that you've got companies investing in their companies to buy things that they're buying from their own company. There's a lot of real sort of interconnectedness that maybe there are some people saying this is certainly could be worse than the dot-com bubble. And I think we're certainly seeing signs of this, not only through the opposition to data centers, where people are saying we don't want these things, and yet governments and others are desperately trying to tell us that, no, they'll be great. And we've got that aspect, but we've also got this sense of people also thinking, who decided that we all wanted AI, And so when you've got so much investment into a product that a lot of people are going, isn't this crap?
Yeah.
That seems very untethered to reality.
Well, that's a cheery note to end on. Then,
We're
Greg,
back to ending on a downer. This is good. I'm loving this. We can't leave our listeners happy. We have to leave them going, great.
Contemplative,
Thanks,
at least.
Thanks, Greg. The world's stuffed.
Anyway, come back next week.
Come back next week and find out if it's still stuffed.
Hey, there's some things are good.
Some things may have changed. As we say.
Since the world might have been fixed since recording.
We will leave it there. Thank you, Elinor. If you would like to read more about what the heck was going on with inflation, head on over to the Gardening Australia site and read my column there. I've broken down all the numbers and looked at actually what were the biggest price rises, things over the past year. If you've been buying lamb, you've certainly been noticing prices going up, so good time to be a vegan. This episode of Dollars and Cents was recorded on 30 July. Crikey, that means we're getting into August.
I know.
Where's this year gone? Where has it gone, people? That's the real question about Dollars and Cents. As always, music is from Blue Dot Sessions. Everyone, have a great week. We will see you all again next week.
See ya.